how you actually can protect your family, protect your legacy, which is very important. When you're building a business, sometimes you're so busy in the thick of things that you're not thinking about the long-term protections you should be building in place to make sure you're financially set. Look, a lot of business owners think their exit plan is to sell their business, and sometimes that never happens. So what are you doing now to plan to make sure that you actually have the protections that you deserve to have for your legacy? And what happens if you don't sell your business? What happens if you do sell your business? Are you positioned correctly? Well, we're going to discuss that today. And with us today is Sandy Pollack. Now, she is the founder of Trimaran Advisory Group Ltd., a financial advisory firm that goes beyond traditional business and estate planning. Now, serving as both principal and lead financial advisor, Sandy is an advocate for values-based legacy planning, believing the building wealth and managing wealth are not the same thing. Now, Sandy's certified as a family enterprise advisor, certified financial planner, chartered life underwriter, and trust and estate practitioner. Sandy, thanks for joining us today.
It is a pleasure to be here, Ty. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm excited that you are here. I always like to start from the beginning because when we talk about estate planning, everybody kind of has sometimes a different vision in their head. My business partner is an estate planner. He refers to it as this just so you see how big the description is. He said some people take all their stuff and throw it into a field. And then he said other people build a shed around their stuff in the field. Then other people build a moat. So like I said, all I'm telling you is that everybody describes it a little bit differently. So what is estate planning? Give us an idea of what we're referencing here.
Well, I guess I should go back to building wealth is not the same thing as managing wealth. I have a brick in my office. I don't know if you can see it on the video because it's not very liquid. You can't put spaghetti on that and eat it. And so when you're discussing estate planning, I'm going to change that to estate thinking. And I say that because everyone has their own individual journey to creating wealth. And at moments it can be exhilarating, and at other moments it could be quite frightening. But the point is that when you've reached a point where you have sufficient financial resources to support your well-being and those of your family, some people call that financial independence. When you have excess, that's when you have to think about estate planning or estate thinking, because if it's not planned correctly, a good percentage of it can kind of be withered away in a drain, and that's not really what your intention might be. It can also, if it's not planned correctly and thought out correctly, you can create everything that you've built and put it in a blender and pulverize it. So how about that instead of a moat? And that pulverization includes your family members who are going to be fighting and arguing because the wealth builder did not put the time in to think about what would happen when they're not around to ensure family harmony. And really that's the purpose. I mean, at first an entrepreneur goes out there and wants to just put food on the table. And then all of a sudden things get bigger and they start dreaming bigger. And then they realize that they can create more wealth than they actually need. And that goes back to a legacy. And is that legacy going to be sucked into a rabbit hole of taxes and misuse of and waste of dollars? Or is that legacy going to be intentional to show your family members and reflect your values? And those values can range from hard work to honesty to integrity, to compassion, to family first philosophy. And so really estate planning is more than just throwing seeds in a field and more than building a moat around it. It's the ability to think about building a farmhouse with many rooms that can serve your family and maybe even be used to serve your community. That's really what proper estate planning should look like.
So I see a lot of entrepreneurs were very good at trying to continue to build wealth, but very bad at managing wealth. So what are some of the things off the top of your head that we should be focused on when it comes to managing and protecting wealth?
I think the first thing is to assemble your team. In other words, you're going to need, you can't do this alone. You will need a banker, right, for financing. You will need a financial advisor. You will need a lawyer. You will need an accountant. These are all members of your professional advisory team that really need to work together in harmony. What I have seen and what I have changed with a lot of our successful entrepreneurial clients is to stop treating your professionals in silos, because then they're missing information to better serve you and to do their job to their utmost ability. And by having a team that's assembled and using them or deploying them to collaborate with each other is going to help you avoid some of the mistakes that very successful people have found themselves in, or have left a disaster and a mess for their loved ones unintentionally. So I think that would be step one. And the other thing is to clarify and what your values are. The purpose of your wealth will evolve and change as you journey through life, from your 20s to your 30s to your 40s to your 50s to your 60s. And just like you go to your doctor for a checkup, right? Just like you might do changes in your exercise program because your body changes, it's the same thing with managing your wealth, protecting your wealth, and estate planning. It's, at the beginning of a business, you have very little liquidity. So you got to make sure that if you happen to check out a little too early, that your family's not left selling your business at pennies on the dollar. That changes when you have a business that's constantly churning out money, right? Like a hose. And so I think assembling your team is number one, making sure they know each other so they can collaborate with each other for your best interest. And the second thing is thinking about what you want and why, for yourself, for your financial security and independence, and also for your loved ones.
Sandy, great advice. What about the importance of this? You've touched upon it sometimes, and I think what happens if we don't do estate planning properly? Let me ask you that.
Then you create what I call the alphabet effect. And picture in your mind a set of dominoes. And each domino has a letter: A, B, C, D, E, and F. If you don't plan and you happen to check out a little too early, and by the way, I can guarantee you, and it's the only guarantee that I say to my clients, is there is a 100% guarantee that you will die. 100%. I don't know when. I hope it's 95, could be 85. I have clients that walked out of life at 42. But understanding that, and if you haven't planned, this is what happens. You're gone. The first thing is your accountants start coming in and adding up and subtracting your assets and your liabilities and your tax obligations and your debts. Then the bankers come, and the bankers who loved you because of you and because of your vision and the team that you assembled start to get a little nervous, and they might start pulling some of those lines of credit. The same thing with creditors. Creditors might say, you know what, I know we gave you 90 days, but now we want 30 days because you're not here. And then comes D, your debts, or people that owe you money. They say, oh my God, guess what? Ty's no longer around. Maybe they forgot about that accounts receivable. Why don't we wait till they contact us? So now what are we at? D? Oh, what about E? Employees. You got a business, you're feeding many families. The kingpin is no longer there, and he was like the orchestra. He was like the conductor in the symphony. So they say, you know what? I better go look for another job. I don't know if this business is going to be around. Another domino. F, family. They're going, where's the paycheck? We got a mortgage, we got food, we want to take that trip. And then finally G, which is government, and they will demand taxes. They want their taxes, and they're number one. So I think what happens is if you don't plan, you end up leaving your family with a real mess, a mess beyond what anyone could imagine, and what could be a thriving, successful business or family business enterprise can go down like a bunch of dominoes because of lack of clarity, lack of planning, and lack of really putting in some deep thought into what you want and why.
Do you think that a will helps in this? And if so, why do we need a will? What does a will do for us to help prevent this from happening?
That is a great question, Ty. So I'll ask you this. Why did you get into business for yourself?
To be able to have more time for my family.
Okay. Maybe freedom. Okay, nobody telling you what to do. So imagine. I
don't like to be told what to do, Sandy. I don't.
Neither do I, Ty, and neither do any of my clients. As a matter of fact, that's why usually the definition of an entrepreneur is someone who's unemployable. All right, because they don't like to be told what to do. They like to tell people, or they like to do what they want to do and hire other people. So with that in mind, you've spent your whole lifetime building a business or many businesses, and all of a sudden you're gone. Guess what? You can't say where you want this to go. The government decides, because dying without a will puts you in a situation called intestate. And every state, every province, every country has different laws. So not only will the government decide where your assets go, and you can think of Prince as a good example. He was a multimillionaire without a will. The number of wealthy people that die without a will astounds me. They decide, and not only do they decide, but they charge you for it and take tax money that probably you could have avoided if you had your estate planned properly. So all of a sudden, when I talk to a lot of successful business owners, they tell me this. They say, Sandy, this is what I want to see happen. One is I want to take care of my family because they're number one. Number two, I want to know that my business, my employees are taken care of, right? Three, if I have any debts, I want them paid because that's important, right? And the government, let's take care of them last. Now, if you read the first line of any will, all right, with or without it, it says, first in line is the government. That's number one. Second are your debts. Okay. And if there's anything left over after the government's taken their share and you've paid off all your debts, and God knows that usually when there's forced sales, you can get really good deals, but you're not around to negotiate it because you're 6 feet under now, Ty, right? Then your family's last in line. So why is it important? Is because if you like control while you're living and you want to ensure the well-being and financial security for your loved ones, as well as for the people that have contributed to your success that you've hired, then I think it just does not make sense to me why you wouldn't have a will. However, with that being said, with this book that I wrote, Don't Leave a Mess, there's a whole bunch of myths around why people don't write their wills. One is they think that if they write a will, they're going to die. Like there's a myth, right? Well, if I don't write my will, I'm going to live. Well, guess what? The opposite happens. It's almost like saying, you know what, you are going to die. It's a question that if you don't write a will and you do happen to die at the wrong time, you've left a disaster for everyone around you, versus just getting it done and then file and forget about it. You've got an umbrella in case it rains. You don't know when it's going to rain, but there's superstitions around it. And there's also people get uncomfortable about talking and discussing and thinking about their mortality. Here, Ty, come on over for dinner. We're going to discuss death. You want to come over? Oh, Sandy, you got that? Let's talk about, I don't know, in Canada, it's hockey. The playoffs are happening. Can we talk about hockey or let's talk about basketball? So it's a very uncomfortable subject. And yet at the same time, when you dig deep and start to unravel, it's not about death, it's about life. And it's about the people and the lessons that you've learned, that you have an opportunity, if you plan your estate properly, including a will, including a legacy letter, that all of a sudden you have something that can transcend generations, but can also help your children in those times at that juncture in their life where they need that pearl of wisdom, of strength, and you're not there. And yet all of a sudden, my dad did a great job. He worked hard, provided for his family, and made sure that he didn't leave us a disaster. They will remember you if you've left them a mess. And that's not the kind of legacy that any successful entrepreneur who loves their family wants to do.
So what's the first step we take? How do we even begin the process of creating a will?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, you've really made it clear on why a will is important. How do we start? Like, what's the first step that we take? A lot of people don't even know what to do or how to start the process of creating a will.
I think, first of all, you need a team. You need to contact your lawyer, number one. Reach out to your financial advisor so you actually know how much wealth you have. It astounds me when we sit down with our clients and we go through their personal net worth. Like I've had a number of clients who are worth $150 million and they had no idea. They were just building and going and building and going. And then all of a sudden they realize, whoa, like this is significant here. I don't have to worry about, my groceries, whether there's inflation or whether I can take a holiday or buy a cottage or a boat or whatever. So the first thing is reaching out to those advisors to say, listen, I really got to plan. I want to plan. I want to start a will. I want to write a will so that I don't leave my family a mess. And find out if those advisors, particularly your lawyer, your financial advisor, your accountant, assemble them together to say, how do I best do this so that I can ensure that what I've built does not go to naught, and to ensure that I leave a family legacy instead of a disaster. So you've got to reach out to your professional team. There's no question.
When you're helping your clients through this process, what are some things that really need to be included in a will, especially some things that we wouldn't normally think should be included in a will?
All right, that is a fabulous question. The first thing is to ensure that your children understand that if they do receive wealth, they're stewards of wealth. I call this, is it a legacy or a lottery? So ensure that there are provisions in your will that protect your children so that if you happen to walk out of life a little too soon, you can have guardrails on the money that you leave them so that they don't all of a sudden become lottery winners. That would be number one. Number two, I would say that once you've figured out how much, normally it's like I leave everything to my spouse leaves everything to me, and then if we both die, we divvy it up. You got to spend a little more time thinking about that. When? We don't know when that when is. Is it when your children are 10 or when your children are 30? Those are different whens. So having that will and thinking about, well, who's going to take care of the wills? Who's going to take care of the kids? Who's going to take care of the money? You might not have the same people managing the money, right? And being stewards for the well-being of your children than you would caring for your children. The other thing I think is once you've sat down and your professional advisors need to have a list of questions to ask you and give you scenarios of what about if this happens? What about if that happens? Every child, how many children do you have, Ty?
2.
You have 2. Are they exactly identical?
No.
In personality?
Very different.
Understanding that and thinking about that will help you when you meet with your professionals to construct a will. And the other thing I recommend to our clients when we help them is to write a legacy letter. And that's the why. Why did I do this? Maybe a little bit of history about where the wealth came from, how it was built, so that you now have been able to share something in writing. Perhaps, how you feel about your children, how you may have felt blessed when they were born, how maybe some struggles you've had, and perhaps share a few pearls of wisdom. We have one that we helped our client construct, a legacy letter, where he basically said, if this is, if we leave this money, we want you to understand, look beyond the money. He said, most importantly is staying together as a family. And he put that in his legacy letter because he wanted his children to understand. And he shared in his legacy letter the source of his wealth, how this family business was started by his father, and how he was able to take it to a huge level, like 10x, and the trials and tribulations, and shared in this letter just a few nuggets of wisdom that I think will be a source of strength and inspiration alongside of the will, for his children, whether he walks out of life a little too soon, or even if he, loses his memory at the age of 80 and doesn't know what he had for breakfast, because that in writing will really seal the deal. And I want to add one other thing, Ty, is that when your wills are completed, you're not done, because your wealth journey changes, your priorities change, your children grow up, they get married again. Right? They have kids, they have other kids, they have stepkids, and understanding that refreshing and rebooting whatever it is that you wrote over the course of your lifetime is very important to keep it relevant.
So how often should you go back and update a will then?
That is another great question. When there's a change in your life. So those changes can range from having another child, getting divorced, getting remarried, selling a business, acquiring another business, buying real estate. Like as your wealth, just every 3 to 5 years, what's changed? And sometimes we're not even aware of the change. For example, we had this pandemic and a lot of people are having meetings virtually. We're having a podcast where I can see you and you can see me. Technology has been a big game changer. Well, so is our wealth planning, so is our wealth thinking about what we have built and why we've built it. And because we're quite often so caught up in the race to grow and build, we don't take the necessary time to step back. So do you go to a dentist, Ty?
Sure,
How
regularly.
often? Regularly.
Oh, I don't know, every 4 months, I think.
There you go. So I'm not suggesting that you review your wills every 4 months, but maybe every few years, just to make sure it's still relevant. I've seen situations where a client had put as guardian for their children, their best friends, which they had a huge fight and never talked to. And they go, oh my God, I don't, this person's going to be taking care of our children. We haven't spoken in 5 years, or, oh, that was when I had no money. Now I've got all this money, and I certainly don't want to leave my child with $5 million, because I know what I would do with $5 million when I'm 18 years old, right? So the idea of including trusts in a will is another important component, because slowly children can receive the money, but in a way that's not giving a 16-year-old a Ferrari when they haven't even got their driver's license. They'll smash it up, but they don't care because they don't own it. So I think that it should be about every few years, or when there's a change in your life, a significant financial or personal event that's changed, that you realize that's got to go even ahead of your dental appointment.
So outside of a will, and it clearly, now you've clearly made sense of what this makes sense for us to have, what we need in it, and what happens if we don't have one. What other kind of estate planning documents should we be focused on, or should we be thinking about? Or when we work with an estate planner, what else may we be exposed to that are documents other than a will?
So if you're a business owner and if you have partners, having a properly funded shareholder agreement. A lot of business owners start businesses with a partner on the back of a paper napkin or with a handshake. And things happen and things change. And to make sure that there is a proper selling of shares, and you have liquidity for that shares in the form of corporately owned life insurance. So having a shareholder agreement, having a proper investment portfolio. Who owns it? Is it yourself? Is it the business? Knowing where that structure is, and having your documents together in a safe place, so that people aren't kind of looking for Waldo when it comes to all the different documents that you might need. Another thing that you may want to consider is having a conversation with your family about what you've done and why. I've seen so many families broken up, divided, because the wealth holder didn't take the time to discuss and share the contents of their wills. I was just at lunch yesterday with an accountant, and he shared a very interesting story about a very wealthy couple who one spouse had passed away. They had two children. Both were doing fine, but one had done exceptionally well and sold a business for about $50 million. And so the mother decided, one of the children that was doing fine wanted to buy a cottage that was worth, I don't know, $2.5 million. So the mother decided just to give the daughter the $2.5 million without telling without telling the son, just doing it. But of course, the son found out and was very upset and said, Dad would not have done that. And the answer was, well, you have all this money. What do you care? But it had nothing to do with the $2.5 million that was given as a gift to that child. What it had to do with was the price of silence. And if they would have just said, listen, you've done well. Do you mind if I do this? And having a conversation. Now we're talking about grandchildren that aren't going to see a grandparent because there's so much anger and resentment. Dad loved you best. You were the chosen child. All this stuff comes to the surface that's been hidden, almost like an iceberg, because the conversation hasn't happened. So I would say, particularly with children, and if you have more than one makes it somewhat easier, but it's important to share why you've done what you've done, where it is, and the decisions that you've made, so that all of a sudden you have communication. And I think that the price of silence is the number one cause of estate litigation in North America. It's a burgeoning industry. The lawyers are throwing flame in the fires, instead of just having a conversation and hearing and listening to your kids to understand that there's equal and there's equitable. I mean, if we're not talking about a child, if you have a child with special needs, for example, then of course it's important to your other children to explain to them, listen, This is what we're thinking of doing. How do you feel? What's a better way? And all of a sudden, you've got families that are more together than separate. And it pales me. I have to tell you, I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on litigation and lawyers' fees when it could have gone to a charity, right? It could have been redirected to causes that are so much more meaningful. And it really breaks my heart. So I'm hoping that, if I can get the word out to think about what you've built, to make sure that, you've taken care of those unforeseen events, that yes, you do need a will, but you also have to think about it, not just get her done like on the internet for $9.99, but really reflect, because when you're building your wealth is very different than managing your wealth. And managing your wealth should take a little more time than someone's commitment to going to a dentist every quarter, right? And boy, that dentist appointment is important, but the disaster that you can leave behind to your family, to your community, why, when it just takes a few hours to just press the pause button and think about your thinking?
What about an estate planner? You've mentioned not going online, obviously, to be able to get a will, which is, I'm sure not the best way to do it. But what do we need in an estate planner? What does an estate planner do to help us in these areas?
So there's all different kinds of estate planners. It's really about fit. So what's the checklist to find the right estate planner, I think, is more the question that you might want to ask yourself, Ty. So I would say I want to go to someone who understands business, right? Have you dealt with other businesses, other business owners, and understand the complexity of running and managing a business or a family business enterprise with various assets? Are you curious about me? Are you alert? Are you responsive? Are you resourceful? And also, do you have the confidence in an area that you don't know much about to say, I don't know, but I will find out? And I think that the estate planner, it's not a planner, it's an estate planning team that really needs to be considered when you have a business and significant wealth. So if you're just working, right, and earning a paycheck, you can go on the internet, right? If you don't have a lot of wealth, you have your house, you have some retirement funds, maybe that's fine, right? I don't know, but I would say that for those particular entrepreneurs that really have big futures, that are making big futures for themselves and their loved ones, it's time to get your team together and make sure that they care more about you than them. They'll get paid, they'll do well, but they'll do well by providing value and assistance to you so that you can make wise choices to protect and control what you've worked so hard to build.
Sandy, great stuff today. We just scratched the surface of what there is to cover. So where should everybody watching and listening go to be able to learn more?
So I've recently published a book, Ty, called Don't Leave a Mess: How to Disaster Proof Your Family Legacy. That could be found either on Amazon, or we have a website with where you can buy the book directly, or you can also, there's some podcasts. It's just very new. So we've got a list of required reading, or I didn't put it in the book because we kind of had so many pages already, but you can find that at www.don'tleaveamess.ca, or go on Amazon. We have the book in Audible. We have the book ebooks, and as well in hard and soft copies. So that might be a very interesting way, simple to use book, easy guides with lots of examples and stories, so that it can help you as you just press that start button on planning how to protect, preserve, and transfer what you've worked so hard to build.
Sandy, thanks for coming on with us today.
It has been truly a pleasure, Ty, and thank you again for inviting me.
So listen, if you're watching or listening to this is so important. We're so busy in the building of wealth that we just completely forget the management, the protection of the wealth that we're building. And look, I think most people that pass away before their time don't anticipate that that's going to happen, right? People that have long-term stuff going on do, but most of us don't. And this is why it's so important that you create, your legacy of, your family having the peace of mind and protections they need when you're gone. But it only starts if you kind of begin the process of making sure that you're protected. And even though we talked about wills and some limited things today, really there's a lot more of expansive information in Don't Leave a Mess. So go to don'tleaveamess.ca. That's don'tleaveamess.ca. When you're at don'tleaveamess.ca, right there, you're able to easily order the book. You can go to Amazon for other versions as well. And there's a lot of resources here. As Sandy mentioned, there's tools that she mentions in the book that you can access from her site. There's recommended reading there. There's a blog that dives into different topics as well. Her podcast covering topics similar to what we've discussed today, amongst many other things, are all at don'tleaveamess.ca. So make sure you go to don'tleaveamess.ca so you can make sure that your family has the protections they deserve to have, and so you don't leave a mess for them to clean up. So make sure you go to don'tleaveamess.ca